Hello, dear bosses. Emily here, and it is with great anticipation and a heavy dose of bittersweetness that I bring you this very special episode of the Being Boss podcast. For over 5 years, Kathleen and I have shown up in your podcast feed to let you listen in on conversations we've had about what it takes to show up as you are, live and work as a creative, and how to monetize that creativity as a business owner. It all started at the very end of 2014 when I had a stroke of inspiration that had me pitching my business bestie to join me in starting a podcast. For 4 years, Kathleen and I published a podcast every single week. In 2019, we started sharing episodes only once a month. And we told you why at the end of 2019 in an episode titled Burnout and Buyout, where Kathleen and I shared with you how intense burnout led not only to us publishing episodes less frequently, but it led to a shift in ownership that took us from being 50-50 partners to 85-15, with me as the majority owner. If you haven't listened to that episode, I recommend that you go back and give it a listen. It's episode number 219. It will give you some important context to this conversation. Because we're basically here to give an update to that episode. As of a few weeks ago, Kathleen and I have implemented another shift, one that leaves me as 100% owner of Being Boss. And in true Being Boss fashion, we're here to show you how we did it, how we navigated another difficult conversation, and what will come of being boss in the only way we know how, openly and with full vulnerability. To help us have this conversation, I called in a friend of mine, Michelle Corey. Michelle is the CEO and founder of Frequency Media, a podcast production company based in Atlanta, Georgia. I called her in to actually interview Kathleen and me about this multi-year journey that we've taken to land us in this place, to guide us in sharing this story with you, the story of friendship and partnership and business ownership, really digging back into that period of burnout that created the conditions for the shift and the future of being boss too. And because this was such a big chat to have, we will be sharing it in 2 parts. This is part 1. But before we dive in, I do want to share a bit with you about our sponsor, FreshBooks. Business will be filled with hard conversations, from assets to liabilities to ownership. But to get you to those, you need to get comfortable with one of the basics, money. If you want to be a boss, you don't need to waste your hard conversations on things like billing your clients, following up on invoices, or tracking your expenses. Those should be easy. They're at the very foundation of what it means to do business. And with a tool like FreshBooks Cloud Accounting, they're even easier. With features like sending estimates and quotes, tracking your time, and sending invoices, and award-winning customer service, FreshBooks is here to help you up your money game, whether you're solo or are growing your team. Join FreshBooks today and get 50% off of your first 3 months. Just go to freshbooks.com/beingboss and enter Being Boss in the How Did You Hear About Us section.
Here we are. The day has come. Emily, Kathleen, much anticipated. How are we feeling?
Feeling good.
Also feeling good.
Yeah.
Let's do it. This is going to be a big chat.
I mean, any hard or uncertain or scary feelings have already been processed. We are sharing in a time where the hard part of it is probably behind us.
Probably. It better be.
Well, and that's actually a great point. Yeah, because there's a lot of processing in space that these kinds of decisions and conversations require that I think we don't talk as much about the need for processing, right? So, we're skipping ahead a little bit about, talking about processing, but I definitely want to get back to what that processing looked like and felt like for each of you and how it went. But first and foremost, I want to know, and I know all of the bosses out there want to know how this even came about and what the road to this decision looked like for you guys.
Yeah. So I think it really started with burnout. So right after the Being Boss book came out in 2018, I mean, we were like balls to the wall.
Yeah.
For a year and a half, 2 years, maybe even like up to about 3 years at that point, just really making Being Boss happen on top of our individual businesses, and not even being boss, just the podcast, which turned into the business, which was events and community and all of these things. But it was also the book then too. It was sitting down and writing a book and then creating all the marketing plans for the book and launching the book and all of the things. And once that was all said and done, Kathleen and I were a little broken.
I mean, yeah, that's a lot, you guys. That's an incredible amount of, it's not just work, it's creation work, which takes all of you, mind, body, spirit. So I know full well, most of the people listening to this know full well about what that burnout ended up looking like and feeling like for you guys. And it's no wonder that happened.
Yeah. And on top of that, we both have families. We have our own individual businesses. Right. Emily launched a new business in the middle of all of it. I was completely sleep deprived, which I stopped talking about on the podcast. But for those who are wondering, my child, who is 6.5, has just now started kind of sleeping through the night.
Stop.
But for the most, I mean, he's still up probably a few times a week.
Oh.
Anyway, all of this to say that definitely like compounded things. And then there's the more like current events part of it, which goes into the full buyout, which includes, I would say, around 2016. I mean, things just collectively started getting hard, and we had to start thinking beyond just, here's how to grow a business. You know, we started thinking more holistically about the world around us, and that kind of, I think that led to a little bit of burnout too. Like, how do you juggle all the things? Family, individual jobs, a podcast, growing a podcast into things like books and events. It just became a lot.
You know, I'm curious, when you talk about it getting hard, what did that look like more pragmatically? And I ask this because I think what we're talking about today is a really important conversation about knowing when to make a really big change. And I think it has a lot to do with being honest with yourself about when something doesn't feel like it's resonating as much anymore, and being courageous enough to make the change that's needed. And I think it all starts with the feeling of something that you used to love and used to fuel you not feeling that way anymore. So talk to us a little bit about what hard felt like for each of you.
Oh, well, that's interesting and tricky. I don't think at any point did I not love Emily or Being Boss. If anything, my personal relationship with Emily was growing deeper, and you know, we had been growing roots into our friendship, right? So whenever I say hard, it's kind of like the hard of parenting, where like you don't always love being a parent, but you always love your child, you know? And so that's really how I felt about what we had created at Being Boss. And that's what made it so hard, is that I loved podcasting. I loved writing a book with Emily. I loved hanging out with bosses in New Orleans. I loved so much about it. So then why do I feel funny? So I think that is getting to what you're saying, Michelle, is that on paper and even in my heart, everything was good. We were wildly successful. We were gaining in popularity. But at the end of the day, I was just feeling a little tired and spread thin, and I wasn't really sure. I just wasn't sure. And that goes into that processing part of it. Like, how do we start to really process what's actually wrong, or if there's anything wrong, or if it's just something needs to change?
Yeah. And I think for me, and I think for both of us too, because yes to everything Kathleen just said, 100%. And it started rolling into a complete depletion of energy. So to show up to a thing that we love and not feeling like we loved it anymore, just because we almost didn't have the energy to love it anymore, was really difficult. And I know I started going into an intense period of depression, the likes of which I had never really experienced before. Kathleen, I think, was going through similar, maybe not quite as much depression as I was, but still not having the energy to quite show up. And like, we don't half-ass anything. And we don't like to show up and half-ass anything. If we're going to show up, we're going to show up and give it everything we have. But when we're showing up and we don't have very much to give it, how is that really any different from half-assing something? Right. And I think there is a difference for sure, but we didn't like showing up and not having the energy to give it. And so that was really hard for us. That idea that like, we just did that interview and neither of us feel great about it. Or we just, we want to do this event, but do we really want to go? Like, it really started going into each of those decisions and each of those conversations that we were having. We just realized that the fire was like tiny. The fire that was once blazing had really lost a lot of its fuel.
So one thing that you were saying, Michelle, too, about it, being hard and what does that pragmatically look like? What it pragmatically looked like was not knowing what was wrong. And so I think one thing that I could feel Emily and I were both doing is trying to figure out what was wrong without making each other the enemy. Whenever like a relationship doesn't feel quite right anymore, and so you turn the other person into a total asshole in your mind.
Yes.
I think that we were
absolutely.
both really trying not to turn each other into the asshole. I'm sure individually we were like, is it her fault? Or is it being boss? Like what is wrong here?
Well, Kathleen, that's actually a very self-aware thing to say, because I just went through a similar situation, and I feel like it's almost like we're hardwired, or maybe we're taught, I'm not sure if it's nature or nurture, but it sometimes becomes easier to make the outside world the scapegoat and to project your inner turmoil onto something tangible in front of you that you can point at and call the source of your problems. Because I think it's very scary for a lot of us to admit that the source of the issue is coming from within us. That's a scary thing. So that's a very self-aware process that you went through.
And just like working on a relationship that you really care about, we also took different approaches to try and fix it. So we said, what if we don't have a vacation this year? What if we stop recording podcasts 6 months in advance and do it more in real time? Like we started trying to take different approaches, just the same thing that Emily always says, which is test and change. We were doing a lot of test and changing, which is probably why it took us a couple of years after the beginning of the burnout to figure out our final solution, which was fully selling to Emily, which is a whole other story.
Even what Michelle's saying about like putting it on something external, it wasn't us putting on each other. I feel like we were almost putting it onto the business model, right? The business model isn't working. Like there's something like we're doing it wrong. It's not easy enough. It's like, it's draining us, all of these things, which is why we started testing and changing everything. Was, maybe if we did less events, we'd feel less burned out. Maybe if we recorded less often, we would feel less burned out, like all of these things. And it wasn't the business's fault either. Like it was just a natural evolution of a lot of things that equated into just a bigger shift that needed to happen.
Yeah. And, I think that's a really smart move. And it's actually something that that like diagnostic period, right, is a very important one. We're in the middle of 2020 right now. And I think that we're all in an ongoing diagnostic period within and without. And, even me with frequency, I'm evaluating how to, we keep using the word pivot. And really what pivoting is a process of diagnosing weak areas of weakness or areas that you've outgrown or areas of opportunity, to put it in more positive respect, and then turning toward those and incorporating those new areas into your life. And that's what it all has to kind of breed from, those moments of discomfort, or when your stomach is a little tight, or when you're a little too exhausted, or when you're not feeling energy replenishing. And to all of those points, I think that's the opportunity in discomfort, is showing you where there is opportunity for diagnosing or diagnostics and pivoting.
Yeah. And after we tested everything in the business, we realized it wasn't the business.
Right.
That there was that it was.
But you did your due diligence, right? You were like, 100%. Well, let's try to figure out where this is coming from. So what resulted from that process? What did you diagnose as the problem or opportunity?
I don't know that we ever diagnosed
Well,
the
no.
problem.
Well-
Unless it was me. I guess I was the problem because I'm the one that's out now.
No.
don't
I
accept
think it
that.
was. I think we both had different problems. I think because once we realized it wasn't the business necessarily, like it wasn't something within the business, we thought
Right.
it's the business. Like then we both just need out of it. Like Being Boss needs to go. We need to go do our separate things. And that was a diagnosis. And so we started going down that road. And so for about 6 to 9 months, we were operating under the assumption that at the end of 2019, Being Boss would be over. And so we let go of half of our team. We started stripping down our processes so that we were really just sort of skating by, just as we figured out how to shut it down and what that would look like. And that made Kathleen feel significantly better. It made me feel better for a little bit. And I think the reason why it made me feel better was because we decided on an action. So instead of just like wallowing in it, we decided, okay, here's the action we're going to take. Let's do it. And that made me feel better for a bit. And then I started thinking, okay, then if we're not doing Being Boss, I had just started Almanac. Almanac was not big enough to support me yet. It wasn't going to. So I was like, well, then I'm going to have to find some other way to support me and my family. So I'm going to have to go build a personal brand again, which I had kind of let slide because I had started putting all of my time into Being Boss. So I'm going to have to go back, rebuild my personal brand, start doing coaching. I might have to start a podcast, like just sort of building this sort of personal business coaching brand for myself. And I couldn't do it. Like sitting down for months, I would sit down at my computer to make the plan, to, design my website, to figure out the content strategy, how it was that I was going to bring on creative business owners to coach them and help them start their business, which is what I had done on one-on-one before Being Boss. And in the first year or two of Being Boss that I had shut down so that I could do it within Being Boss. And then I was going to shut down Being Boss so I could go do it separately again.
Right.
And I couldn't do it. I could not do it. It was giving me so much anxiety and making me so angry. Like there was just some like heat in me that would come up every time I would sit down and figure this out. And so it was at that point that I realized that what was making me so annoyed was that I was trying to rebuild something that I had already built. Because Being Boss was the thing. Being Boss was what I needed to build, but I'd already built it. And
Right.
so the idea of letting go of the thing I had already built to go build, and I wrote this somewhere, to go build a shadow of the thing that was already existing,
Wow.
was something that intuitively I would not allow myself to do. Every time I sat down, there was a huge block to doing it. And that's when I realized that my solution was not leaving Being Boss. My solution was to do the work that I've wanted to do within the context of the brand that I had already built with Kathleen. And so if Kathleen's solution is leaving it, my solution is keeping it. And we had never really considered a solution apart from each other. Like
Right.
the solution was going to be the same for both of us. It was like, if it's not doing events, then neither of us are going to do events. If it's doing less podcasting, then both of us are going to do less podcasting. But whenever we started taking our like situations and thinking about them separately, and we came up with separate solutions, that's when we both got the solution that we needed.
And then as a branding expert, I was very excited whenever Emily told me that she wanted to take over Being Boss because, one, I understood the brand equity in Being Boss and what the whole reason why we started Being Boss, for context, is to build up our own personal brands within and create a lead generator for our individual businesses. A surprising and amazing side effect of Being Boss was the community that we built and the events and going to New Orleans for vacations and the book and all of those things. So, Emily had a personal brand. Like I could see it from a more holistic branding standpoint where she didn't need to rebuild a personal brand because she already had it. It just lived within the Being Boss sphere. And then I could also see where she had, knowing Emily, she's still my business bestie, knowing that she likes to build brands that could live on beyond her like beyond her name. Being Boss was also a container for that, where she could grow it in certain ways beyond just Emily Thompson. So it was really the best of both worlds. And then also, I love Being Boss and I love the brand, and I was more than happy for her to continue to carry the torch. And this is where I say I was getting in the way and I was the problem, because also what was happening is Emily, in trying to test and change, she was like, okay, slowing down didn't work. Only releasing one podcast a month isn't really working. I want to do a conference on top of the vacation, maybe some quarterly masterminds and an online community. And that was the deal breaker for me. I was like, I cannot. And so all of this to say, whenever the solution was to buy me out, a partial buyout, I was like, yeah, let's do it. And even at that time, I said, do you just want to do a full buyout?
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And that was really for financial reasons, like really for tax reasons. Like, I don't know how the tax implications work, not being 50-50. I was real nervous about it. I'm still nervous about it. I don't know what's going to happen whenever I file my taxes for 2020. But, you know, I thought, I will still be here to support you. Why don't you just take it 100%? And she's like, no, I really think that 15% feels right. And I'm like, that feels good to me too. Like, it was really just based on feelings and gut decisions. But then there were issues with that, which we could go into, but.
Yeah. I think once again, the power of Being Boss and the two of you is that you are an example for what it actually means to be business besties, which is like a cute moniker, right? But like the depths of that, the real energy behind that is actually having enough space to see the other person and their needs. And what you've described about, Emily, when you're saying, what I realized was that we weren't going to do this together as we always expected to do things together. And it was like joint all the time. That's actually fundamentally the difference between codependence and interdependence, and being able to say and have the wherewithal to be like, I'm going to trust my gut. So Kathleen, you guys often listen to how things feel. You feel through things. And that is an incredibly powerful business strategy. We're told a lot that that's not the way to do business, but it's actually the best way to do business, because business is fundamentally a human and personal endeavor. And when it stops feeling right, or when a decision doesn't feel right, you have to pay attention to that decision. So not only were you all listening to what felt right to you, and I know that this is basically oversimplifying the journey of feeling what was actually right and wrong. And, that's why I'm so glad that we talked about the diagnostics of it, because it is a process and it feels really sticky and muddy and murky when you're actually getting to these decisions that we're at today, but they're worth a lot. And going through that process is incredibly important. And now you looked at each other, you saw what the other person needed, but then you also listened to yourselves. And that's what landed you at that first initial conversation, which sounds like it was really an easing in period to where we are today, right?
Yeah, I also, as you were saying that, it made me think about kind of our individual visions and what we needed whenever it came to content. So my favorite thing about Being Boss is the podcast and the book. The New Orleans vacations are like up there as well, but as Emily knows, they really stress me out. Like, I would have a lot of anxiety before, during, and after. Not as much during, but before and after those vacations, I was like, oh God, like this is a lot. And it's really, for me, it felt like a lot of responsibility to show up and make sure that everyone stayed safe and all the things. But as far as like our individual needs and content, I also got to a place where I was sick of talking about business. Like, through Being Boss, I came to understand that what it means to be boss is just to try and be the best at what it is that you're doing, to put in the reps, to be the best graphic designer you can be, to be the best life coach you can be, like whatever it is that whatever your livelihood is, whatever your craft is, just aim to be the best. That's what it comes down to. I have nothing
yes,
left to
yes.
say. I don't want to talk about business strategy. I don't want to talk about funnels or opt-ins or all the things. I just want to talk about craft and, like almost habits and routines that support you being able to be the best. And there was a lot of that content in Being Boss, but it came to a point where I felt like I had said what I had to say already. And the actual recording and creating of the content started feeling a little bit like muscle memory, like a little bit like I was just impersonating who I've been. And in some ways, recording of Being Boss was limiting me from growing into who it is that I'm going to become or changing, right? And I want to be very clear that my decision to leave is not at all saying that Emily's decision to stay and to deepen the content of Being Boss is wrong. Like that's the other thing that's like a kind of a psychological mind flip whenever it comes to parting ways, is that you inherently, whenever you're making a decision or even a bold opinion, I mean, some of our listeners sometimes felt challenged just by us having an opinion. We're not saying that one way is the right way. But it's tricky. It's tricky to see someone do something differently than you are and to not place a judgment on it, right?
Sure.
Even an objective judgment. And so this is me saying that our needs in even what we were talking about were starting to shift a little bit.
Becoming an expert and sharing what you know is often the path of the creative entrepreneur. If you find yourself with a desire to teach, you may be considering creating courses or ebooks to share your knowledge with the world. And Podia is here to help you do just that. Create courses, digital downloads, and memberships all on one platform. Podia, the hassle-free way for creators to earn a living from their passion. Get 14 days free with no credit card required by going to podia.com/bosses.
Yeah, I think that, look, I'm a Virgo. I know way too much about judgment. And I think it's natural, right? But I also think if we spent all of our time, or at least most of our time, thinking about what feels right to us and being totally non-judgmental about that, I think we would experience less judgment to the world around us. But now I'm curious, because I think we're at a great point to start digging into the more pragmatic side, unless you guys want to go in a different direction. But I think we're at a good point to start digging into the pragmatic side of how you all went from the 15%, 85% split to then making this decision to fully do the full buyout.
Well, I think like everyone right now who's felt something, it was COVID.
Yeah. Yeah.
Kind of. I mean, it was sort of sparked by COVID. It wasn't COVID. COVID was like the point at which we all had to look at what it was we were doing and decide if that's how we wanted to continue. So whenever we did go 85-15, I started putting into place all the things that I wanted to do, that I had always wanted to see at Being Boss, or even like not even always see. I mean, a lot of it I had always wanted to see, but once I had made that decision to pick Being Boss back up, burnout wasn't over. And I don't even think I'm really still to this day completely over burnout. We've talked before.
Yeah, remember our burnout and buyout episode where you were like, I'm over it. I'm good. No. And I was like, I'm not good.
I think it will always sort of, not always, maybe not, hopefully always sort of simmer on the back burner is how we always sort of explain it. It's like sometimes it like the heat turns up a little bit and I have to like step away or cool off or whatever. And it's with every passing month, the temperature goes down. And so I'm hoping at some point that back eye is just off and I don't ever have to worry about it again. Though I definitely know that everyone should always have to consider it, especially in the very fast world that we live in.
Well, so hold on real quick about that, though, because when you say with every passing month it goes down, are you are both or either of you pretty strict now about building in times of rest so that it does gradually go down over time? Because listen, burnout will come right back up. It will rear its ugly head if you don't intentionally build in systems of rest.
Yeah, I definitely have significantly harder boundaries around my time and responsibilities than I ever have. And I'm much more particular and just like vocal about where those boundaries are and, taking on things or not taking on things. And there have been times in the past, I guess year at this point, because it was just about a year ago that we made that initial transition. There have been several times where it's reared back up for sure. I mean, the holidays were one for me. Maybe 2 or 3 months ago was another one for me. And I now see the symptoms. I know when I'm starting to feel like I just get this like insane tiredness in my body that like I just cannot shake. I know that I'm going to call into work to myself for a couple of days.
Right.
I'm going to take extra care of myself. I'm going to sleep a whole lot. I'm going to go get me a couple juices. Like there are some things that I will do. So yes, I stay very mindful, and am quite particular about taking extra care of myself whenever I feel like coming back up.
Mm-hmm. And that's also important, is identifying the signs of your own burnout. So for me, I just hit a burnout point and then I took a full week off. It was 10 days off because there were weekends involved. I feel like a different person. Mm-hmm. What I realized about myself is when I'm burnt out, I get angry at everything and everyone. I'm so irritable. I am the most tyrannical version of myself, like the worst version of myself, because I'm exhausted. And so I'm just snapping at everyone.
For me, self-care has literally never been an issue for me. Like I'm a youngest sibling. My motto since I've been young is do what you want. So I've always been really good at that. And what I wanted for a while was to work 2 full-time jobs and have a new baby and all the things. Like I wanted everything that I wanted. And then whenever I didn't want it anymore, I got out. So whether that was by insisting that we slow down, if anything, I felt like I was holding Emily back before we did any sort of buyout because I was insisting on some boundaries and slowing down before we could figure out a solution, if that makes sense. And so if anything, now I just work 1 full-time job instead of 2 full-time jobs. I do get a little bummed out because I feel like I'm lacking the ambition that I once had. And that's probably the only way that I'm feeling, because I'm still doing, if you follow me on Instagram, you know I do all the self-care. I'm drinking my lemon water. I take 2-hour-long mornings. I'm working out. I take weekends. I don't work in the evenings. But lately I've been thinking like, well, do I start another podcast? Do I start blogging? Like I've been trying to it's kind of like whenever you haven't had sex in a while with your partner and you're like, I want to do it, but I don't want to do it. And now I feel shy whenever we start to get it on. It's kind of like that a little bit. Like I want to have another project, but I don't want another project. I just want my full-time job. And then I want to be able to watch some Netflix and work out and make my meals from scratch and do those things. So I trust that I'll get it back. Like I'll get some content creating mojo back at some point, but for now I'm just going to give myself some space. And that's what my burnout, like the boundaries around it, looks like, is no new things. One of the questions I've been getting a lot since Emily made the announcement on Instagram is like, ooh, I can't wait to see what's next for the both of you. Or Kathleen, I bet you're itching to do something new. And I'm like, actually, no, I'm not.
Yes. So for you, it's like an aversion to anything new that's going to push you into that workaholism mode.
Yeah, or just like having to work at all mode.
Right. Yeah. And that is so fair. And I think that it is good that you're sinking into that, because you have to just allow yourself to be whatever your body and spirit are telling you, you have to sink into. I mean, I
also don't know that I believe in that either, because I work full time at Braid Creative and that's my full-time job and I bust my ass there. And I don't always, like, my mind and body and spirit aren't always like, yes, let's get up and do the thing. Like I actually really, because I see a lot of that on Instagram, like protect your energy. And I just want to be like, this is what protecting your energy looks like. I know that you all are bummed that maybe I'm quitting being boss, but this is what it looks like. Or it looks like getting up and doing the work that you don't necessarily, I do think that that's still required to be boss. And in order to be boss, I had to leave being boss so I could grow Braid Creative and continue to work full time. I mean, I get what you're saying, Michelle. I'm not like completely being contrary to like the lean into
no. Listen,
what your
Kathleen,
soul
I
needs.
am of your ilk. I mean, there's like a thing called, I'm not going to name it, but there's like people who like really push hard for napping, and like there's people who are almost orthodox about resting. I am naturally a workaholic. And I think that has a negative connotation because the truth is I love my work, and I really think you and I are similar because I personally don't have a tolerance for working on things I don't love. I don't have a tolerance for not being aligned with my purpose and passion. So when but I will say my spirit, so it's not your spirit speaking to you when you're like lazy to do work. That's just like you're lazy to do work today. I think your spirit is speaking to you, or at least for me, when I feel shut down and I feel incapable and averse of doing the work that I know just a month ago was driving my spirit forward. And that is when I realized I'm going to take a week off. I'm going to shut down Frequencies offices and have everybody else take a week off the week after. And so that I can ease back into it. And lo and behold, I'm waking up motivated and driven. And because what I love to do, I am proud to say it is part of my identity to work hard and create things that I'm proud of, as it is for many bosses listening. So I am totally on the same page with you. I think that with anything, there are extremes. And to say that you should be like napping all day so that you're really rejuvenated is like amazing if you have a trust fund.
And I will say what we're all explaining here is the mindfulness that is the foundation of being boss.
Yes.
Right? It's about not doing what people are expecting you to do, or even what you've always done. It's about listening to yourself and evolving every step of the way and taking actions to align with that evolving. It's when you stop doing that things get terribly broken. And it's another reason why I've always felt such content with this evolution, is because I know we both feel so aligned with it. We are in every way, shape, and form practicing what we have preached on this podcast for over 5 years. Like that's what we're here living it. And so, anyone who is sad about it, and I get it if you're sad about it or whatever. If you're disappointed, you're missing the point.
Yeah.
Because what you should be is like so in awe. Why not? Of the fact that we are here doing it, that you're watching the evolution of it, that you're watching us show up and take the actions that are aligned, even if they take a long time to put into action, or if they are not the most popular, or if they are difficult, or if it is leaving something behind, or if it is taking something on all on your own, or whatever it is, we're here doing it. That's what this is.
And speaking about, the evolution and intentionality of it taking a little while, is whenever Emily made the announcement that the full buyout had happened and she is 100% being boss, some people said, oh, I felt something was different. Well, that was intentional. For the past year, we've been intentionally kind of doing a changing of the guard, really bringing Emily's personal brand up front, and I was sliding to the background. That was with intention, but that's also what made the 15% kind of hard. So coming back to that original question, Emily was now putting in place all of the things that she wanted to do. I felt so nervous about the conference. It's so funny. I think I had a little bit of, you know how animals can start to like scatter before an earthquake, or how they feel things coming. I feel like I felt 2020 coming because both my husband wanted to buy another rental property and with all of our cash. And I was like, I want to hang on to our cash. Like, wow. I don't want to put it into anything that's not liquid. we had some things at Braid Creative, like some decisions that we made there where I was very conservative. And for a while I was like, is my anxiety through the roof that I just am so averse to risk anymore? Which is another difference between me and Emily that we've talked about before, is that Emily is very entrepreneurial and I am very much of like the day job security. I'm scared to spend money to make money. Emily's all about it. So whenever she wanted to do the conference, I was like, I don't know. Like, this is a huge amount of expense. This is really scary. And then COVID hit. And I remember I was sitting in the parking lot of my gym whenever Emily FaceTimed me, which is so on brand. Like, I'm at the gym and Emily's like making really hard decisions about the future of being boss. So she FaceTimes me and is like, well, we need to make a decision about what to do about this conference because of COVID. And I was a little, I will admit, resentful, not of Emily, like more of like just the whole thing, you know, like the whole world at that point. Because when we were
So
having to make the
relatable.
decision, which is boss of us, that we decided to shut down the conference before New Orleans decided to shut down conferences or events.
Yes.
Like, we decided to do the right thing before the government decided to do the right thing, which
Before
was
it was
shutting
decided
down.
for you. Exactly.
Before it was decided for us. I kind of wish that we had waited an extra week, because then a lot less people would have been pissed off if it wasn't us making the call. But whatever, that's what being boss is about. It's like taking
Exactly.
ownership, right? Except at that point, I didn't want to take ownership over these decisions. I was like, I'm not being compensated to make these hard decisions anymore. And that's where it goes to talk. Emily was talking earlier about like half-assing something. I didn't know how to be 15%. You know, I was definitely sitting in the back seat, kind of, but trying not to be a backseat driver to Emily, you know, and just trying to really be supportive and hold up the roadmap for her and say, I think maybe we should turn this way. And she's like, no, I'm going off road, you know, or whatever it is. Emily never went off road. She had a map the whole time. She had a vision and a map the whole time.
Right. I'm
Right.
definitely always the one who reads the maps. Like, also when we're traveling, I read the maps.
That's truth right there. So anyway, I remember at that point thinking, I've got to get out of this. Like, I've got to get out. I bet we both felt it. That's the other thing I want to say, is that Emily and I feel each other. We are at the point where we can basically read each other's minds. If I've learned anything, it's that if I have a funny feeling, I need to just talk to Emily about it, because she's going to have my back, and vice versa. Like, don't you think, Emily, we've been scared to have these conversations and then we're always on the same page? Or if we're not on the same page, we give each other so much grace and compassion to get on the same page. I even remember at one point we were actually kind of fighting. I can't even remember about what. And you were like, I am not your sister. And now I kind of want to be like, but you kind of are. Like, at this point.
Definitely
So-
at this point. And you know what you said about, we keep coming back to the fact that like the timing of this is no coincidence. The rumblings were happening, you know, and it seems like part of the rumblings of what would end up unfolding in 2020 was this decision to buy out at least most of Being Boss from you, Kathleen. But
No,
I'm
that
actually
happened in 2019. So
Yeah, that
Emily
happened.
bought out most of Being Boss from me
Right.
this time last year. So July of 2019.
right.
January
That's
of
what I
2020.
mean. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so then what happened was Emily
Hold on,
was
hold
like, I'm
on.
going to take.
I need to give my side of this.
Okay.
Because whenever I did FaceTime Kathleen in the gym parking lot, and I was like, we need to make this decision. This was also me not knowing how Kathleen needed to be 15%, because I'd already made the decision. Right. And I was just going to include Kathleen in on that decision in a way that felt like me giving her 15% say. And because I also knew that she would feel exactly the way I would, or I did, about it. Right. So like, it was almost
Yeah,
like,
because at that point
That's
I was
tricky.
like, I don't want to get on an airplane. Like, do
Yeah.
I call it quits if Emily wants to go? I ended up telling Emily, I remember saying, listen, I'll be there if you want me to be there. Because at that point too, the world hadn't been shut down. So it was really
Right.
unclear
Mm-hmm.
how safe or unsafe it was to even get on a plane at that point. And so I really did want to be first and foremost supportive of whatever it was that Emily wanted to do. But I knew that either way, after this conference, that we were going to have a conversation that I wanted out.
And that's where we're going to cut it for today. But we'll be back in 2 weeks for the second part of this interview as we shift into navigating this new decision and what's coming for the future of being boss. To be sure you get notified of that episode, make sure you're subscribed to this podcast. Until then, do the work, be boss.